Welcome to Women of Steel with me, Miriam Grace, the podcast where women who've had their mettle tested help us make important links for ourselves. I talk to remarkable women about their lives and challenges through the lens of my own work as a psychotherapist. We uncover stories which challenge the power of the status quo and validate the voices of marginalised or disadvantaged women. Hello, today I'm talking to my friend and author, Suzette. Suzette Mullen is a certified book coach. She's a speaker and she's the author of the coming out and coming of age memoir, The Only Way Through is Out. There is a beautiful copy of it on screen, and I've got the audiobook. This book was named as one of February's most anticipated releases by Lambda Literary, and Suzette's essays have appeared in the New York Times, Today.com, Brevity, and other outlets. As well as being an author and a speaker, Suzette's a book coach and guides other writers to write their memoirs and nonfiction, to write their stories, and she helps them define their big ideas. Suzette particularly enjoys supporting LGBTQ plus writers. Suzette's also a graduate of Harvard Law School and Wellesley College, and she made a big leap personally and professionally at midlife, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And she's working on her next memoir titled After the Leap. So welcome, Suzette, welcome. I think that maybe people could guess what your book is about. The Only Way Through is out, but maybe you'd like to elaborate on what the book is about anyway.
Sure. So it's, at the very high level, it is a book about a midlife revelation about my sexuality. At the time, I was what we call an empty nester. I was married to a man. We had a solid marriage, and I had a revelation about a long-term friendship I had with a female friend, and that I didn't just love this friend, I was in love with her. And that sets in motion the story that I tell, and The Only Way Through is Out. The first part is sort of grappling with the question, like, what is this? What does this really mean? Am I really gay? Do I have to leave my marriage? All of those things, and coming to terms with my sexuality, my sexual identity. But then really the big question was, okay, do I step into this future that I know nothing about, and leave the safe, comfortable life that I have? And I grew up very risk averse, a rule follower, all the things. And, here I was in my mid 50s being faced with this choice that felt really impossible at the time. And so the book is talking about that journey of both coming to terms with who I am and then really seeing if I could find the courage to step into what I knew at a deep level was true for me.
So when you say the courage, that means you were frightened.
Yeah, I mean, I was terrified. I had been with my my now ex-husband. I had been with him since I was 22 years old. We had been married. We had been married for 30 years. My whole adult life had been in this partnership, which for the most part was a really solid and very comfortable and safe partnership. And not only was I having to contemplate what would life look like on the other side as a single person, as someone who was coming out as LGBTQ plus, but really, could I do my life? Could I do life as an adult on my own? And I really initially didn't have a huge amount of confidence about that. And I really was, yeah, it was terrifying to contemplate leaving the safety of the known when I really had no idea what the other side was going to look like.
Yes, yes, and it takes quite a while through the book for you to really accept that you can't stay in your marriage and be authentic. There's a lot of back and forth in your mind going through, and it's really interesting because I've been listening to the book with my wife, and she's a lifelong lesbian, so she's listening and she's saying, well, she's shouting, of course you're gay, of course, but I've been listening, and I was reliving. It was such a process. Going, what does this mean? What are the implications? And you speak in the book about these words, the unspeakable words, you call them, and I remember wishing to unknow the truth.
Yeah, once you exactly. I mean, I think, a part of the journey that I write about in this book, and I think is a journey that many people who are coming out later in life have, is that was really learning to understand what sexual identity was. I mean, I had only thought of myself as one way for 50 plus years, and frankly hadn't given a whole lot of thought about it. It was just like, I was, part of the heteronormative world, and I that's who I was. And so when I really came to terms with the fact that I had this attraction to this other woman, and it was definitely a sexual attraction, and a lot more. It wasn't just a sexual attraction. I did not understand early on really what being gay or being queer or being a lesbian was about. I really thought it was about sex. And yes, now on the other side, sex is definitely part of it. And I came to understand that it was about a lot more than that. And one of the questions that I ask in the book when I'm still grappling with this is, when I think it's really just about sex, I'm like, well, how important is sex? I mean, like, I have all these other things in my life that are really good and really solid. And, if it's just about sex, maybe I can live with the fact that I'm not going to have that part in my life. And I mean, and that's absolutely a valid choice that people can make. But I think for me, it was definitely early on, it was not understanding that it wasn't just about sex. It was really about identity and about who I am and who I want to be with, who I want to be partnered with, and not just sexually, but in all senses of the word.
Yes, yes, and I feel such a resonance with you around that. And you've written that part of what you want to talk about today is the costs and the joys of authenticity. And I was saying to you that quite a lot of your story and my story, yeah, they're not about having sex. They're about, oh, I can define my life. I can choose my direction. And I was also wondering whether you feel we're quite a unique group within LGBT culture, in that the late life lesbian has that experience of being straight, as far as she knows, as far as she's aware of, and then having the unspeakable words come, and then following the inner voice. And I mean, you talk a lot in your book about the inner voice and what the voice is saying, and the costs become apparent through the book, but the joys, joys of authenticity. Was it worth it?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing that at least for me was difficult, and I think this it's difficult for other people, is that who are going through a similar journey, is that the costs become apparent pretty, they're pretty obvious, right? The costs of leaving a life that that you've known, hurting other people. If you're, not everyone who comes out later in life is married and has children, but a lot of the women that you and I know are in that situation, and it's difficult even under the best of circumstances, right? Of your decision is impacting other people's lives quite dramatically in my case. And all of the security of the old life, both the heterosexual privilege, financial security, all those things. So the costs become very apparent, and the joys are sort of fuzzy and vague on the other side. I mean, you hope you're going to get there. You hope that it's going to be worth it, right? You hope all those things, and you do if you're in community with other LGBTQ plus people, you do see some hopeful and inspiring stories, and I hope that that is part of what my story will do for people who are stuck in that messy middle. And what I've come, yes, your question, I know I'm sort of answering in a long-winded way, but yes, was it worth it? I think that for me, the joy, yes, there's definitely been moments of, real like sort of ecstatic joy and all the things, but how I would express where I am today versus where I was at the beginning of the journey is that I am in a place of peace. I am peaceful and content with who I am in the world, and I feel comfortable in my own skin. I feel like I'm now doing the work that I was put on this earth to do. I feel at, that word disease, really comes from, it's not being at ease, right? I feel at ease in my life. And when my book opens, I'm clearly not that. I am clearly restless, and I don't really understand what that restlessness is about. And so, yes, is it worth it? For me, I would say 100%. Not that there weren't a lot of hard times, not that there still aren't moments of grief that bubble up, but the experience of living at ease with yourself is, to me, it's all worth it.
Yeah, yeah, it's gold, isn't it? That is when I think about my therapy practice, that's what I want for all my clients. I want them to feel at ease with who they are, what they are, rather than trying to be who they're not.
Haven't quite finished the book yet, and so spoiler alert, there's going to be a third therapist that's going to play a role. So you got that. I won't give that part away. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge therapy fan. I am currently in therapy not because of any crisis, but because for me, it's part of self-care. I am somebody who processes out loud, and I need to have a space once a week where I can just process in a safe space, whether I'm in a crisis or not in a crisis. So I'm a huge, huge fan of therapy and therapists. So that having been said, yeah, I mean, the first experience with a therapist who I actually went to see her in my late 30s when I was in the throes of the early stages of confusion over this friendship with this female friend who many years later, I come to terms with the fact that I'm in love with her. But very early on, I was so confused about my feelings, and I was really in a lot of turmoil. And that's why I went to the therapist in the first place. I don't know if they train you in therapy school to say this, but every therapist I've ever had has basically said the first time, so what brings you here? And there's some variation on that. And I remember the first therapist who in the book I call, oh my gosh, I can't even remember now because I changed her name, but we'll just call her therapist number one. Um, I, I answered that question was I said, I have a friend who's become too important to me and I don't know what to do about it. And so there I was in my late 30s recognizing this, but then kind of putting it back into a box. And I mean, there were a lot of good things that came out of that therapy experience. And for whatever reason, and I can hypothesize, we did not really explore my sexuality. And during 3 years, even though I went in and said, I have this friend that's become too important to me. We talked about sex one time in 3 years, and I recount that conversation in the book. And so, I don't know what to say. I totally don't want to dump on that therapist. And I looking back on it, many years later, I can see that there were some problematic aspects to that experience, but it was what it was.
What I'd like to go on to now is that we found something, both you and I found something that at that point we weren't able to get in therapy, and that's probably, I think, because of the lack of training in therapists, which is something I talk about in my writing. But we found a group that you call the Lalas in the book. And I have to say, I am listening to it on audio and it's bringing tears to my eyes. Yeah, it's bringing back for me all the joy and of those, those deep connections we made, because I think how completely unexpected it was to discover I wasn't alone. And we were really lucky, weren't we? It was right at the start, and there were, what, 50, 60 of us?
Yes, I mean, I do talk about the Lalas at length in my memoir because they really they were pivotal in my journey. I mean, like many of us, and granted, I found the Lalas, and I think you did around the same time in early 2016 when the group had just formed, and so that's 8 years ago, right? And there's now a proliferation of later in life groups on the internet, and still there's probably many people, and specifically women, who right now may be questioning, maybe having these feelings that feel very uncomfortable, and they feel very alone because they don't know a single other person in real life who is going through it. And that was absolutely my experience. I mean, I as I talk about in the book, of course, I Googled the thing, all the things that we Google, how do you know if you're a lesbian? How do you know if you're gay? Falling in love with your best friend, all of those things. And, you found bits and pieces of information, and you found a book or two here and there. But finding this group, and really at the start of it, when it was really a small, intimate group, and some of the women in that group really carried me through the really dark days of my journey, and to this day are some of my best friends. A couple of them, I see them regularly in real life, and we've been through an experience together that most of the other people in my world, whether they're queer or straight, can't relate to. And community really, I think community saved my life. It really did. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I really think it did.
Yeah, and I'm really moved to hear that. Partly because it echoes my experience, and even well, it was 2016, I think, and we were in this group, and the representations increased in the last 8 years. It doesn't sound as if it could be true, but even 8 years ago, it was so different, and the isolation was so powerful. And like you, I've made friends for life, through that group, and they just get it. They know. And there's this experience of people, well, trauma bonds us, and it's this thing like if people survive a train crash, they very often feel a connection because they've gone through that same thing. And it's lovely listening to that part of your story, of those bonds created, but painful as well, because this is the part of your memoir that really, by doing that, by joining the group, you now can't back out of the knowing. um you know what you know. So what message do you think your book is giving women in that same place of knowing? I'm wondering if you can summarize that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of a two-part message. The first part is about authenticity, and authenticity is worth the cost. I mean, we talked about, the joy on the other side, which is feeling at ease in your own skin. And then the second message, which I think is a message that, well, both messages I think are for readers beyond the LGBTQ plus community. The second message is it's never too late. It's never too late for a new beginning. And I came out in my mid-50s, and in 1 year, I came out, I got divorced, I moved to a city where I knew exactly one person, and I started a new career. And 7, 8 years on the other side, I've built a life that is satisfying and fulfilling, and I feel alive and energized. And I'm 63 now, and so I mean, if I can do it, other people can do it. So that's the message I really hope people can take away from my book.
Yeah, yes, that trusting that they're capable, as you found out when you were living in a cottage with a mouse problem. Yeah. Well, I think now's a good time to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about why stories matter, and the writing process, the therapeutic part of writing. As you said, you didn't just start a new life, you started a new career. So let's talk about that after the break.
Great.
Are you coming out later in life? Are you partnered with someone who is? The Women with Women Conference has you covered. Meet like-minded people and hear from authors, therapists and specialists at a beautiful venue in Sheffield. The first Women with Women Conference is set for June 2025, and with limited spaces, tickets are available at womenofsteel.co.uk. We'll see you there. This event is not open to men or straight people.
Hello, welcome back. I'm talking to Suzette Mullen, the author of The Only Way Through Is Out. And before the break, we were talking about coming out later in life and the costs. And joys of authenticity. We were talking about finding the courage to listen to your inner voice, and the importance to Suzette and to all of us of community and representation. So I think, Suzette, this leads us on really well to your new career, your writing and your coaching of other writers, and perhaps that interplay between the inner voice that you talk about and, you know, I'm curious does your inner voice, or listening to your inner voice, play a part in your writing, or is it just much more technical than that? So I'm curious about that. And you know, something that I was really struck by is that even if I wasn't gay, even if I wasn't a late in life lesbian myself, how well written your book is. I love the style, and your descriptions, you know, are really visual for me. Because I was picturing these things, especially as we were talking about during the break, this group that you've called the La-Las, which is actually where we met, and that being very emotional and moving to relive our early years coming out. So I've been having tears come to my eyes when I've been listening to that on audio, and I really love the way that you structure things. So there's this chronological narrative, but every now and again there'll be, as perhaps you'd call it, a flashback that highlights why this part of the story is really significant or important, and this accentuating the narrative by memory. So it was really delightful to discover what a good author you are. So anybody listening, I recommend Suzette's book, just for the reading. And in the break, Suzette, you and I were saying how much we're both fans of Elizabeth Strout, and I was saying to you, there's a sort of simplicity of her writing style, as if it's almost easy for her to write and simple for me to read. And I'm sure it's something a bit more complex than that. There's a remarkable unremarkability about it. But I, you know, what is it? Because I literally hold those books to my heart. I just feel tuned into them. So why is it that you're a fan as well, and what do you like about her work?
So we call what we call in the writing biz, whether it's in memoir or novels, fiction, like Elizabeth Strout writes, that we talk about interiority, which is what we mean by that is getting inside the characters, whether it's the protagonist in most cases, which is the main character. In memoir, that's the writer, and in Elizabeth Strout's books, it's, you know, Olive Kittredge or Lucy Barton. Is the interiority is getting inside the character's head and experiencing these moments as they're experiencing it. And that is hard to do. It's a skill that it takes time to learn. And when I work with writers, I mean, I'm constantly asking them, you know, what's really going on here? Put it on the page. And so what I love about Elizabeth Strout's writing is that she's so good at that. And when you say her writing's simple, I think how I would describe it is she's very clean. She's a very lean, clean writer. She's not a flowery writer. She's not, you know, writing all these, you know, fluffy descriptions, and it isn't necessarily poetic, but it's very focused writing. And I love to think that, you know, I haven't consciously modeled my writing after hers, but my writing has been described as as lean and clear and easy to follow. And but really the main reason I love Elizabeth Strout is that she takes me inside the head and the world of her characters, and so that I can feel what it's like to be a human experiencing different things. And I think that's why stories matter. That's why stories are so important, is that we're human beings walking on this earth with whatever challenges and struggles we have. And when we read other people's stories, whether they're novels or memoir, we get to see how another person or character has navigated the world. And it gives us hope, it gives us inspiration, it helps us feel less alone, all of those things. And that's why stories really matter.
Yeah, and empathy, I think, there's so many different life experiences that we can't and won't have. We're white, we've not been refugees, we've not lived in the 19th century. All these experiences, we can expand our empathy by reading, but by, as you say, living the interior world of the character. I really like that. So when people live through experiences we might not have had except through literature, I'm thinking about how helpful reading The Beekeeper of Aleppo was, for example, or there's this book by Anna Burns called Milkman, set in Northern Ireland, and I've got clients who've grown up during the Troubles, and having lived with men with balaclavas on, jumping over the back wall and running through the house and so on. To read the book, it was as if I had sort of lived there for a few months as I was reading it. So it helps me with my empathy.
Yeah, it absolutely does do that. I think, the bottom line is stories connect us. And sometimes they connect us with experiences and people who are experiencing similar things that we've experienced, that maybe we feel like we're the only one in the world who's felt that way. And it's wonderful. And then sometimes, like you say, you read books that they're still connecting with you on some deep universal level, but they're exposing you to a world that you didn't know before. A book that comes to my mind that I would highly recommend is called, it's a fairly new memoir. It's called Hijab Butch Blues. You can put that in your show notes. And it's by a queer Muslim woman and living in the United States. And she actually is she's anonymous, like the author's name is Lamia, I think. And because she isn't free to be out in the world. And it's a fascinating book. So what I connected with were a lot of those feelings about the awakening of your sexuality and what does this mean and all those things. And she's a completely different context for me, right? She's much younger, she's Muslim, she's, and there's a lot in the book about the Quran and all these things, which I found really fascinating. So stories connect us, and they can educate us, and they can help us grow in empathy and in other ways.
Yeah. And I think your book does that for me, because there's a lot of your culture that's unfamiliar to me. And there's an emotional resonance despite that, or as well. So I'm really enjoying the way that it's evoking memory, tears, emotion, and sometimes the frustration, you're gay.
Yeah, well, and then sort of putting on my book coach hat or my writing craft hat, I love that comment you shared with me. I think it was before we started the recording, that your partner was like, she's gay, of course she's gay, you know, whatever. One of the really fun things about writing memoir is that is when the reader knows more than the character knows. So, you know, when you're writing memoir, you're holding two perspectives in your at all times. You're writing about the character you who was going through the events as she was going through the events, and then you're writing from you're holding the perspective of the writer who you are now, who is the narrator telling this story, who obviously, when I wrote the book, I knew I was gay. I knew I knew all of the things, but the character me didn't know all of those things. And what's really fun is you're planting these seeds for the reader. And you want the reader to be like, you're gay, you know, exactly. You want the reader to shake the character and say, get over it, you're gay, move on with it. And that's part of the kind of the fun of it.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, when you're talking, I'm just thinking therapy, and it makes so much sense to me that very often when things happen in our lives, they're stored, and the memory is almost encapsulated. It's encapsulated at the age that it happened, whether it's 4 years old or 40 years old. And you know, you're writing now in your early 60s. So it's really therapeutic for the 60-year-old brain to understand the 40-year-old brain, which understands the 30-year-old brain and the 4-year-old. So you're doing a form of therapy that is where you're taking the memories through each part of your brain as it grows and develops, so that these memories are now being processed by a part of your brain that didn't exist when the incident happened. And that is so therapeutic. So there's a therapeutic element to writing, I think, maybe with these, particularly with memoir, with personal experience. And this brings me on to ask you a bit about, you coach other writers in the LGBTQIA plus community and so on. So what gives you particular joy and brings you to coach others to write?
The writers I tend to work with are people who have a burning desire to write their story, to share their story. I mean, they may be afraid to do it. It might feel daunting and overwhelming and all the thing, but they have some sort of, you know, inner calling that it's something that they must do. Because let me just say, writing a memoir is hard. And I mean, it is hard on many levels. It's hard emotionally, because you're revisiting often very difficult parts of your life. It's hard to actually learn how to write in a narrative form. I mean, many of us think of ourselves as good writers, and we are, but we haven't necessarily written in this way before. We don't know how to shape a narrative and write a scene and show and not tell so much and all those things. And then it's, you know, it's quite a journey to then, once you've got the book finished, is to find a publisher. So it is not a journey for the faint of heart. And so I would never ever push somebody to write their memoir if they didn't, period. Full stop, as I think you say, in the UK. However, if it's something that someone feels called to write, I feel like it's I don't want to get overly dramatic, but it feels kind of holy to help a person birth something that's inside of them, and that a story that not only potentially will heal them through the writing process, but then if they intend it to be for publication, it will absolutely heal others. So I love doing this work. I feel like my helping writers find the deeper story beneath the surface level events that have happened is really kind of my superpower, and it's what I love to do. And so Yeah, it took me, I'm a late bloomer in more ways than one. It took me a while to find my sexual identity and my, sort of my personhood in that way. And it definitely took me a while to find the professional path I was intended to walk. And I'm just grateful that I found it and I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, you look as if you're in the place that you want to be, and coming back to that whole sense of ease within yourself, within your life. So if anybody listening is interested in your coaching, they can find your contact details in our show notes, and they can buy your book. The Only Way Through is out, and that's on audio as well. So after this recording, I'm going to go back and listen to the final 2 hours of the book, which I got just the day it came out. So I really recommend Suzette's book. And Suzette recommends Butch Hijab Blues, and that's on my wish list too, so hopefully I'll be reading that next. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we end, Suzette?
Their story, not everybody has to write a memoir, but everyone has a story, and your story matters. So find a way to share it, whether it's just sharing it with a friend, sharing it on, social media or on a blog, or however you want to share your story. But stories are sacred, and they are what connect us. And your story matters. I think that's kind of the final words I'd like to leave people with.
Yes, and I think it's a healing of the soul, and psychotherapy is Greek for healing of the soul. So people give their spoken stories to me, but that isn't the path for everyone. And maybe people who want to share their written stories can do that with you, and you can support them with that, or maybe people will want to do both. I just want to say thank you so much, Suzette. It's been absolutely delightful to speak with you, and I can't believe we left it 8 years to actually have this conversation in person, but I hope we'll have another conversation later down the line, and that you'll come back to talk to me and our listeners. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story in your book, and a little bit today, and for being such a source of comfort and representation for so many people. Thank you, Suzette.
Thank you, Miriam.
As a bit of an afterthought on this, Suzette and I spoke a bit about the therapy. She mentions 3 therapists, I think, in the book. The Only Way Through is out, and I want to make it clear that I'm not criticising any individual therapist, but I do have a real passion to ensure that therapists are as trained as they can be in these issues, so that they can support women like Suzette, women like me, women perhaps like you, all the better as we move forward with our midlife flourishing. Thank you for listening to Women of Steel, created and hosted by me, Miriam Grace, psychotherapist at Blue Skies. If you'd like to know more about my work as a therapist and writer, you can follow me on social media. Please take a look at the show notes for information and contact details. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself.